Good morning, and welcome to another episode of The Conversation with Kelly Diamond on Voluntary Virtues Network. You can catch me every week on Thursday at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or my written word every Monday, bright and early on globalwealthprotection.com. So I recently engaged in a discussion with a couple of different people, and it all centered around the notion of property and property rights. And I discussed this in my first episode. I touched on the singular right of property, but I think it deserves more discussion, only because new points come up, new discussions, and new conversations, and new perspectives on the idea of property arise, and how we can address the issue of property itself. So I'm on this thread, and while I'm not doing a religious segment, I happen to be on a Christian site or a Christian thread, and we were talking about, I think the conversation started with an original post discussing how so many countries around the world have universal health care, and how behind the United States is in offering the same to its citizens. And I'm looking at this list, and among the many are these defunct, economically collapsed countries in the EU. So my first thing is, okay, fine, they offer it, but they can't afford it. They're broken. Cyprus just had a bail-in, stole a bunch of pensioners' money to make up for the fact that they're well overspending, and their banks are broken. Greece had a bailout twice. Portugal, Spain are all listed. Italy's on the brink, has already had one bailout. They're on the brink of another one. France is teetering on bailout bill. I mean, Ireland, these countries all in the EU are all bankrupt. And you're telling me that they're offering shit they can't afford. But, so I'm saying, well, look, first of all, it's not even feasible for these people to give it. Okay? But second of all, at whose expense, especially in these more egregious cases, at whose expense are you offering this? I mean, it's all well and good that you can be benevolent with other people's money, but who exactly is footing the bill for this? And they say the government as if it were mutually exclusive of my own pocket. And I think you have to do that in order to feel justified. You have to distance yourself from the theft in order to feel like you're not a thief. So they say the government will pay for it. If they can afford F-15s and they can afford all these wars, they can afford to pay for our health care. Thing is they can't afford the wars either. So if they were to stop paying for the wars and they were to stop building these F-15s and whatnot, we still wouldn't be economically sound. So I mean, we still have $16 trillion, $17 trillion worth of debt to pay off. So no, just because you don't buy the F-15 doesn't mean you can turn around and take that same amount of money and spend it on healthcare. The money still doesn't exist. It didn't exist for the F-15. It's not going to exist for the healthcare. So this discussion ensues, and I say, apparently as if I were a stranger in my own town, because people are virtually looking at me as if I have horns growing out of my cheeks. We shouldn't be stealing each other's money to give each other what we think others should have. Right? Now, I'm thinking, silly me, on a thread where purportedly we're all Christians, right? Or at least the trolls are obvious, that the whole thou shall not steal thing would have been a fairly common thread running through all of us. It's not. I think I was one of 3 people who actively were saying, this is not acceptable. This is not an acceptable way in which to address the issue of health care. And I had a dog pile of very proud nationalistic Canadians tell me that, I can't believe how Americans can be so selfish. And I thought, really? I mean, well, first of all, I'm not particularly concerned about being called selfish because I think I am selfish. I'm openly and admittedly selfish. Selfish being defined by me as wanting to keep my own money, right? But I'm not greedy. Selfish is just me keeping what's mine. Greedy is wanting to take what isn't mine. And so I said, look, I might be selfish by wanting to protect my own property, but I'm not greedy to presume that I'm entitled to other people's property. So I'm not going to spend your money in your name and then shame you when you balk at the idea of it. Because if you're not down with me taking your money and spending it on an F-15, then you should be equally upset about me stealing your money to spend it on anything else. I don't care if it's saving orphan kittens. I don't get to pick your charities for you, and you don't get to pick them for me. Now, if you really want to help somebody, rather than being some nameless, faceless, laundered money through bureaucrats, go find somebody who needs the damn help and cut them the damn check. Buy them the service that they need. Next time you go to the emergency room and you see somebody who can't afford it, say, look, what's their health care today? They told me they were uninsured. I can't afford their full bill, but I want to put $50 of my own money towards their bill and see what happens. Or say, look, if you're not going to let me pay their bill, then let me buy a voucher so that when it's time for them to pay the bill, they will have $50 credit in this voucher to pay for it. You'll have no shortage of people who are uninsured or can't afford their medical bills sitting in an emergency room. Pick one. Help them directly. The same $50 that you would have spent to directly help this person out would have amounted to nothing more than $2.50 if you had to launder it through the government. Same goes with the homeless people. You want to help people who are homeless? Dude, I want to help people who are homeless. But my $20 will go a lot further if I do something that is more direct, not necessarily cutting them a check or giving them $20, but me directly giving them $20 worth of resources would go a lot further than me giving $20 to the government in hopes that maybe it'll show up as a bowl of soup one day in front of this person a year later. The inefficiency, financially and just in terms of execution of any sort of services by the government, is patently understood as being preposterous. Waiting for government anything other than a bomb is a futile exercise. So if you really did care about other people, go find those people and help them directly. Your money will go further. Okay? But this whole I gave it the office thing, paying taxes, is nonsense. Anyway, I'm still the one only advocating that nobody steal from another. And they're like, it's not stealing. I said, okay, tell me how it's not stealing. Tell me how taxation isn't theft. And I'll concede the point. I can't get one person to tell me, any advocate of taxation, I can't find one of them, not one, who can make a discernible linguistic distinction between taxation and theft. Now, these same statists, okay, these are the statists who still believe in some form of property right. Okay, they still believe that there is something that belongs to people. Okay, not always. I mean, not in every case, right? Clearly, I'm not entitled to keep 100% of my paycheck, but you're allowed to keep some of it. Okay. Is it acceptable that and so then I say, is it okay for me to come up to you, hold you up at gunpoint, and demand 20% of whatever you've got? Can I do this on an annual basis? Can I do this on a monthly basis? Can I do this on a bi-monthly basis? Is it acceptable for me to do this? To threaten you in some way that if you don't do this, X will happen. Where's the violence in taxation? I said, you're so complicit you don't even see it. Where's the violence in taxation? Well, I'll tell you where it is. Try not paying once. See what happens. If in fact in Canada your taxes are truly voluntary and that there is no consequence whatsoever to not paying taxes, my ass will be there yesterday. Because up in here, when you don't pay your taxes, we have even more punitive measures through our tax codes to cover those bases. If you don't pay your taxes, a newly armed IRS agent could be showing up at your door. They have guns. Men with guns show up. Now, it could be that they'll threaten to put you in jail. They might threaten to take all your other assets. They might threaten to do all sorts of things. And they'll do it. It's not just an idle threat. They'll do it. So if that threat exists, then it's no different than having a gun to your head at the first request. That they're nice about it, that the gun isn't there yet, doesn't negate the promise that there will be guns involved, that there will be cages involved with your ass sitting in it. If there's a threat against you, if somebody says, if you don't do this, if you don't give me your stuff now, these consequences will happen to you by my hand, that's theft. Now, that you've commissioned a third party to do this for you because you're way too chicken shit to do it yourself, and because that would make you less of a Christian, apparently outsourcing your theft to a third party entity is not stealing on your part. Calling for it. You're calling for it. Just because you vote for it doesn't mean you aren't essentially asking that this third party steal for you. The only other thing you could possibly say that could negate what you're doing is to harp on the nobility of why you're doing it. Okay? So this is the conversation I'm having with these statists who would otherwise say, do not steal. So I can be assured that they're too chicken shit to steal on their own. So in that regard, if I leave my shit out in front of them, they won't steal it. Not because they think it's wrong, but because they're too chicken shit. But they're still thieves. If you're advocating taxation, you're a fucking thief. You're just a chicken shit about it. Okay? Which, I mean, I don't know if you're doubling down or just laying out all your cards across the table laterally. But at the end of the day, wrong is wrong. Okay? Now then you have people who say, well, property is theft. Now this is the next step. Okay, this is we should all be doing everything for everybody, and everybody should be paying for everybody on steroids. And that is that there is no property. Property is a fabrication of man's imagination. Is government a fabrication of man's imagination? Yes. Corporate personhood? Yes. They are government entities, essentially, right? So the question is, without government, would you even have property? Well, my argument is absolutely. Property is the cornerstone to a civil society. Okay? Now, you'll have the resource-based economy people saying, well, capitalism operates under the premise that there's scarcity, and there isn't. There's enough for everyone if people just didn't hoard. And I say, well, it's not that there's enough for everyone because people hoard or don't hoard. There's a lot of stuff that's out there that people have no inclination of getting for themselves. So they rely on other people to harvest it for them. If they're relying on others to do it for them, there is a scarcity. It's called labor. There's a finite amount of people willing to do that for you. Right? I mean, take a poll. Go down the street and see how many people are willing to pick your strawberries for you. Now, resource-based economy people ultimately say, well, people don't have to do anything because all the machines will do it. We don't know who's going to fix the machines. Apparently, machines will fix machines. People never have to do anything, really. They just have to sit there and have fun and invent shit and then tell machines to build it. I have no idea how that plays out. I really don't. That starts to turn into some serious sci-fi bullshit that I ain't got time for that. But in terms of just addressing the issue of property, first of all, there is scarcity. Scarcity is defined by the fact that something is finite. Okay? The earth is finite. That it may expand or contract in space, you don't notice that. It's not like 1 second there was only this acre, and then the earth expanded, and now there's 10 acres. No, it doesn't work like that. Okay? There's scarcity. Scarcity by virtue of the fact that there's a finite amount of resources because the earth unto itself is finite. There's a finite amount of people, which means there's a finite amount of labor. Now, if you want to say there's a sufficient amount of resources for everybody, that's not the same as saying there's an infinite amount of resources. There isn't. And because it's finite, then there is some level of scarcity. It shows up on the scale, okay? But they talk about the mentality of scarcity as if it were completely unnatural to think that way. It's not unnatural. Animals do this. Animals do several things that if we watch what they do, we are simply emulating it and sophisticating it. Animals mark off a territory, and they're pretty vicious about defending it. And when you have a pack of animals, and you have the alpha who runs it, they literally do pass it down. There is a new alpha. When the alpha dies, there's a new alpha, and it's the same territory. They go around marking it all over again, but it's not like they go leave. They stay. They continue on. These same animals will stay where they are because they're creatures of habit. Once they establish that this is a safe, resourceful place to be, they stay there. Right? Well, they mark off territory and they hoard. Not all animals do, but animals do hoard. You will find hoarding in nature, especially for animals like squirrels. They hoard. And they're rather isolationist until it's time to help another squirrel. They're not really friendly with each other, but if they listen for one another when they don't hear one of them, they do investigate. They do check on each other. But they do hoard. Okay? They hoard their resources for wintertime. So property does exist. But property, the sense of property, tempers overconsumption. And the buzzing in your ear about there being a finite amount of any resource compels us as individuals to conserve. I only have this much left. People who live paycheck to paycheck know this. There's only so much resource left. I gotta make this last. What's not gonna happen? I'm not gonna blow my shit on one fell swoop on a pair of shoes. A person who can manage their money knows to do that. People who can manage their resources, mind you, will temper it. People who can't manage their resources will have abundance for a day and then starvation for the rest. Right? So it's a matter of resource management as well. But people do manage their resources. And people who can manage their resources are inclined to conserve when they know that their resources are finite. So, if there's trade involved, now I'm not saying it's always going to be trade. Okay? There's times where people are charitable. People are just generous and they give. Okay? That's okay. Understanding full well that when people are giving like that, others tend to be a little bit more liberal in how they use it when it's not theirs. Right? Renters don't take care of their shit the way owners do. Mainly because renters are absolved from a lot of responsibility that owners aren't. Owners will take care of their property. People talk about the clear cutting that was done by Japan, or even it happens down south in Brazil. It's because the land isn't owned. The land is rented. The government confiscates the land, says it's our land, which we all know that government can't own shit, but they commandeer it nonetheless, and then they go and rent it out to people like BP and clear-cutting companies. There's no reason to keep that land sustainable if I have no responsibility to it. I do have a responsibility to the land if it's mine, because I ultimately have a responsibility to myself, and that is I want to profit off the land. I need the resources to be sustainable so I can make as much money off of the land as I can, so I have to keep it sustainable. I can't just burn through what's there. And I want the resale value to be there when I'm done with it. So I have to maintain it. It can't be a piece of shit by the time I'm done with it. I can't sell it for anything. Just look at all the houses that are being, in Detroit. They're not even trying to sell them anymore. They're so dilapidated. The resale value sucks. You can't sell dilapidated shit. There's no profit in it. So even the profit monger has incentive to take care of things that are theirs, that belong to them. If I have to trade you thing for thing, value for value, okay, and what I have is finite, and what you have is finite, then this is not an all-you-can-eat buffet. If I only have $10 and you only have one, or let's say you have 20 pizzas. You have 20 pizzas. I only have $10. It's $10 a pizza. I give you $10. It's not all I can eat pizza. It's just the one. So don't drop it on your way home, right? And don't give away all the slices if you plan to eat some of it. It's not going to regenerate. And no, once you're done with this pizza, you don't get a second one because you don't have another $10 to buy the second pizza. So this is it. So I'm not going to overconsume. I'm going to consume within my means. Okay? Creating means creates temperance of consumption. Okay? Limiting people's means to consume through trade and through property, right, has people treating their circumstances with a sense of reverence and scarcity. Understanding there is scarcity. There is scarcity. It's important that we acknowledge that as individuals, lest we become wasteful. When I was like 3, I would doodle on paper. I would doodle like, Mom. And then I'd go to the next piece of paper. Dad. And I'd go to the next piece of paper. Me. I'd go to this. I mean, I was burning through paper because I thought that paper was endless. I didn't think that there was ever going to be an end to the paper. Paper was always there. Just when I thought I was out, my parents would regenerate this stack of paper for me. But the reality is, looking back, somebody had to replace it, right? So, I mean, there needs to be a sense of scarcity. When I realized, and then one day my parents, didn't buy the paper. I don't know, they forgot, they didn't want to anymore, they're sick of that, whatever. But I realized, oh my gosh, I only have 5 sheets of paper left. I started to fill up more of the paper. I started to use more of the paper. Okay? When I realized that there was only this few sheets left, I went back and started reusing the paper that I used. I'd go to the back of the paper, and I'd draw on the back of the paper. There's no more paper. I have to start finding paper to draw on. So I would go back to paper that I'd drawn on, and I'd say, of course, I'd say, well, I'm not done with this one yet. I'm going to draw a picture of you next to your name. I do stuff like that. That's as a kid. I didn't know what I was doing, other than looking for resources. But I'm willing to reuse resources if that's all that's left. The sense of scarcity made me resourceful. That's a 3. Grown-ass adults should be able to do better. Okay? Now, will people be wasteful? Yes. There will always be the wasters. And there will always be the hoarders. But in an open society, in a free society, they're tempered by the fact that they don't have a centralized, monopolistic, violent entity backing them up with the resources of everybody else. Right now, we're funding a government that goes and picks 3 favorites out of a bunch and supports them with your money. And then you get all pissed that they're wasteful. Of course they're wasteful. That money is coming in perpetuity. Your grandchildren's lives have already been mortgaged. But in the sense that should we have property? Yes. Because otherwise you can't give anything. There's nothing to give. Depriving society of giving, you're not doing anybody any favors by doing that. There's nothing noble about doing that. You can't give that which isn't yours. If there's no sense of belonging, and there's no sense of possession, and there's no sense of ownership, then not only can't you give, you can't take. And that's a scary prospect. Because right now, when I say somebody took his life, what does that mean to you? It means somebody murdered them. If I told you somebody was stealing his labor, you'd know what I was talking about. It's called slavery. There is nothing wrong with murdering and slavery if you don't own yourself. And if you don't own your time, and you don't own your labor, and you don't own your life. They belong to you. You own them. You have sole sovereignty over how that is allocated, if at all. There's no such thing as rape if there's no such thing as property. It's not that rape goes away. It's that it ceases to be wrong. It ceases to be forcible. It ceases to be a negative thing. It's just benign like anything else. That's a scary prospect. One that I don't want to live in. It's not a society I prefer to live in. I prefer to live in a society that recognizes boundaries and respects them. Or will die trying to violate it. One or the other. But I can't possibly abide by any philosophy that says, well, you're expendable. You don't own yourself. It's not hyperbolic because property starts with you. I'm going to the root of it. It's not just houses and money and food and clothes. It's your very person. It starts there. Everything else is an extension of that. Did you use your intellect, your sense of innovation to earn other things? Yes. You sold it on the open market. You took you took your ideas. You made them a reality. You took them to the market. People were like, yeah, I'll trade you for that. You went and traded, trade, accumulated and amassed wealth, maintained your wealth, managed your wealth well, and now you have all this. That's not criminal. That's not wrong. That's smart. If you don't like people hoarding, start finding ways to purchase it. Start finding ways to access it. If there isn't any more of one, go find another way to build another. Create a more sustainable way. I'm not opposed to experimenting, and I'm not opposed to anybody coming up with new and better ways to make resources last. I'm just for trade. Because I value people's lives, and I value people's time, and I value resources. There needs to be some form of temperance, and the only thing that will temper consumption is to have a healthy understanding of scarcity. And to have a reverence for that by saying, I understand your resources are scarce, so are mine. Value for value. Let's see how much value we can get out of this transaction. Maximizing the value. That's good thinking. That's reason. That's forethought. That's responsible. And the people who are irresponsible about that won't last. Because irresponsibility is an unsustainable lifestyle choice. All right. That's my time. I'll catch you next week. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.